This video looks at the non-violent protests of 1957 to 1963, which really formed the core and the heartbeat of the civil rights movement. The Montgomery bus boycott had been a success, even though there had been major divisions between the various civil rights groups. The NAACP activists like Rosa Parks and E.D. Nixon had started the whole protest off, and people like King and other churchmen had took up leadership when asked. However, Roy Wilkins of the NAACP and King disagreed drastically over tactics. Wilkins and the NAACP favoured litigation and going through the courts, as they did with Browder versus Gale. King favoured the mass action of the boycott and thousands of black people marching to work. Relations between the two groups deteriorated even further when King set up his own organisation in 1957, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. 1957 also saw the Little Rock crisis, another key movement in the civil rights process. The crisis really was caused by the governor of Arkansas, Orville Forbes. He was struggling for re-election as governor and decided that he would exploit white racism in order to get more votes. He knew that black men didn't vote. So he announced that he had no intention to integrate Arkansas schools until at least 1963. The NAACP had been on the lookout for a good test case to enforce Brown versus Topeka. Very few schools in the South had integrated at all. And in Little Rock, Arkansas, they found a group of students who were prepared to challenge the law and were prepared to be guinea pigs, if you like, for the NAACP and to attempt to go to a white school. Thurgood Marshall, again, was heavily involved and met with local church leaders in Little Rock and persuaded 9 black students to enroll in September 1957. The 9 students included Melba Patillo and Elizabeth Eckford. Forbes banned the students from entering and ordered the Arkansas National Guard to surround the school and keep the black students out. The mayor of Little Rock, wonderfully named Woodrow Wilson Mann, informed President Eisenhower that the situation had got out of hand. Eisenhower was forced to act, and as you know, Eisenhower would prefer to stay out of civil rights, but he sent troops from the 101st Airborne Division to Little Rock to protect the students. Incidentally, the 101st Airborne was, of course, an integrated army unit, but only white soldiers from that unit were sent to Little Rock. Black students were sent on leave. Black soldiers. You know what I mean. Yeah, my voice is not good today. Bear with me. Eisenhower made a radio speech in September 1957 to try and restore harmony and order. He said he'd acted because of his inescapable responsibility for enforcing the law. However, he refused to endorse Brown Topeka, and he tried to rally the nation by saying that its Soviet enemies were making propaganda out of events at Little Rock. Remember, this is deep in the heart of the Cold War. Little Rock showed that Supreme Court decisions like Brown Topeka met huge grassroots opposition and resistance in practice. Even though the NAACP tried to push things along faster, improvement was slow. And incidentally, Orville Forbes was re-elected as governor of Arkansas 4 more times. It showed that nobody was particularly keen in the South to enforce Brown Topeka, and Little Rock High School itself was not fully integrated until 1960, and it was only in 1972 that all of Little Rock schools were fully integrated. By 1964, only between 2 and 3% of black children in America attended desegregated schools. However, the image of black children being harassed, threatened and spat at by aggressive white adults helped to influence moderate white opinion throughout the USA. Testimony to the increasing importance of television, on-site news reporting, live cameras was really pioneered at Little Rock. And it also proved that blacks had to do more than just rely on court decisions, no matter how hard the NAACP had fought for them. Look at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference for a moment. So this was set up by King in 1957 with a specific focus of improving black conditions in the South. Southern NAACP members had suffered great persecution and harassment, Rosa Parks being one example. She was hounded out of Montgomery. It was much harder, however, for Southern racists to attack a church-dominated organisation, one with the word Christian in the title, like the SCLC. And they offered a direct, non-violent alternative to the NAACP's litigation strategy, and a way for ordinary people to get involved peacefully but forcibly in protest. King's main strategy was to attract national attention to racial inequality, partly through his charismatic personality and his presence, and partly through marches. The marches became the staple go-to protest of the SCLC. They were relatively easy to organise, offered a great deal of safety and protection for those involved in the protest, and gained maximum publicity, really for minimum work. The SCLC, though, did struggle to sustain long campaigns. They tended to be poorly organised, they had few salaried staff, so they were relying on volunteers who, with the best will in the world, couldn't give the time and energy that major organisations and protests needed. In 1959, frustrated at the lack of impact from the SCLC, Martin Luther King gave up his ministry in Montgomery and moved to Atlanta to work full-time on the SCLC. There was also intense and damaging rivalry between the different civil rights organisations. King clashed with Adam Clayton Powell over a plan that King had to picket and boycott Democratic and Republican conventions. And he frequently disagreed with Roy Wilkins, the head of the NAACP, and these clashes were nasty. Powell once threatened to leak a story to the press that King had had a physical relationship with a man who'd been prosecuted for a homosexual act in public. The claim wasn't true, but it does show how unpleasant this rivalry can get. An organisation was not one of Martin Luther King's great strengths, and the early problems the SCLC had demonstrate that. Look at restaurant sit-ins. These are the next significant breakthrough in the civil rights movement, and again, initially had very little to do with Martin Luther King. The first restaurant sit-in began on the 1st of February 1969 at the lunch counter of the Woolworth store in Greensboro, North Carolina. 4 black students from the North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, Joseph McNeil, Franklin McCain, Ezell Blair and David Richmond, sat at the whites-only counter and refused to move. Other students took up and retained the seats on shifts day after day, ultimately forcing the cafeteria to close. Eventually, Woolworths desegregated this store after losing $200,000 in lost trade. This also demonstrated the power of focusing on white businesses. Sometimes when they're losing money, they can forget their racist views. Similar sit-in protests spread right across the South, and over 70,000 university students took part. Interestingly, this is black and white students. And this was a spontaneous movement. It just happened. It just arose. It came from ordinary students rather than from an organisation from outside. Martin Luther King quickly joined the movement and encouraged the students and spoke to them and inspired them to some extent. He promised them SCLC support. But again, he was led into this. He was not leading this. The sit-ins were particularly effective because they eroded support for Jim Crow. When you attack white businesses, they lose money, and they put pressure on city authorities to force change. Very quickly through 1960 and 1961, over 150 cities desegregated various public places. And it tends to be a bit hodgepodge. It tends to be a restaurant here, a park there, but it is a movement. It is moving forward. The other great result of the restaurant sit-ins was that it created the next major civil rights organisation, the SNCC, or SNCC, the Student Non-Violent Coordinating Committee. But, like the other ones, that also tended to get lost in inter-organisational bickering. The sit-ins clearly shifted the focus of black activism away from the NAACP and legal cases towards mass direct action. Many students felt their direct mass programme had brought more change faster than anything that Martin Luther King had done. He was far more cautious and was about going on marches and so on. What SNCC was discovering, that you get a greater reaction and therefore greater press coverage by getting right into white racists' faces. You provoke them, they hit back. And this is a message that inspired and led to the Freedom Ride movements. In the next video, we'll look at the Freedom Rides, we'll look at the Albany campaign, and we'll look at the Birmingham campaign. Thank you very much for watching.